You did actually press. Great. Yep, we are live on Facebook now. And thank you all for joining us. Very nice seeing you all. I hope you can hear us, you can see us. Though it's very nice to have our microphones muted while we listen to Alan tonight or this morning. For those of you who are on the other side of the ocean, it will be a morning, and we will hear from Alan on the topic of way to reconciliation. And we thought that this evening we should have first type of an interview. So Marta will be interviewing Alan, but it would be very nice if you can think of the questions you would like to ask, because later we will have a question and answering time. So please post your questions in the chat box so we can see them, and then we can have that as well. Thank you very much for joining ROM, Renewing Our Minds, and Forum for Leadership and Reconciliation. Very nice seeing you all, and I think I would just hand it over to Marta. Marta?
Why, thank you. Good evening, good morning, and hey, Alan, how you doing?
I'm doing good.
Good. Good to see you.
Yes.
I think we're all very happy to see you, and thank you so much for joining us today. And Alan and I talked about this and thought the best format would be an interview format, just to go ahead and get in as much Q&A as we can so that Alan can go ahead and address your questions and you can pick his brain. But let's go ahead and start off with Alan. Just if you could go ahead and tell us a few highlights in your life that got you so passionate about reconciliation.
Well, first of all, I want to say I deeply appreciate this opportunity to talk to folks around the world. This is exciting. It's an honor and a privilege. And all of you, as you probably all know, right? You're supposed to say something, you're muted, you can't say it, but I love you all. And by the way, there ain't nothing you can do about it. Anyway, that is the foundation of who I'm becoming, who I am. I'm excited to have this opportunity to share. I have missed the opportunities to be with you in person, but thank God for the technology, and we'll just zoom right along. There are a lot of things I could say. I've been on the planet 8 decades now, and I've learned some things. In fact, if I were to title my life, I'm thinking about, been approached about a book, and the title would be Through It All. And I have to give you the second words. The second line is, I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God. That has been the single most important driving force in my life. I had the privilege and the fortune of growing up in a home where, although my father abandoned the first 5 children, I was adopted by a woman who loved me and taught me about who God was. And it was some time later that I received that God. I began to live my life under his direction. That is probably the first move towards that. I was thinking back on my teenage time when I did some things that weren't pretty. They were ugly. And as an African American in the United States of America, I've experienced every form of racism and prejudice in these 8 years. The thing that I'm motivated by is that we all believers have the call to reconciliation. That is really what the biblical description of salvation is being reconciled with our Creator. And out of that, I think I've come to understand that we're not a bunch of racists. We're all Homo sapiens. I think you've heard me say this at other times, that Martha and I, although Martha and I have more melanin than Martha, we are both human beings, Homo sapiens. I have more melanin than she does, but that's not her fault. I say that with a laugh, but I think it's only when we recognize that we truly are one species, and that our major the major impact of being out of fellowship with God is that we lose sight of that. And of course, from that springs the awfulness of racism and discrimination, sexism, etc. Because we lose sight of the fact that we all are Homo sapiens. Then the thing that has really got my attention, then if that's so, then what can I do on this planet to make a difference? As many of you know, I love to sing, I love music, and there's a song, I won't sing it, but I will give you the words. It says, if I can help somebody along the way, then my living will not be in vain. And the question that I have to keep asking myself is, what's the purpose of my existence on this planet? What does my Creator have in mind? And what I see is, very clearly now, is to be an instrument of reconciliation. I believe St. Francis of Assisi prayed the prayer, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. And I think that is what I have been striving for probably the last probably 60 of those 6 of those 8 decades, is to be a reconciler, to be involved in that. The other thing I want to say, because I do want to give you opportunity to ask me any question. As an African American here, I don't represent all 40 million African Americans here, but I do feel I have some insights that might be helpful to have you understand some of the things that was happening right here in this country we call the United States of America. The words that are used a lot by some segments of our society is law and order. And of course, we all recognize that civilization has to have law and order, but they are limited if we don't have justice. Justice is the active, the action of love. Agape is different from phileo, the 3 names for love the Greeks gave. The phileo is brotherly love. It's everyone who looks like you or speaks the same language. It's perhaps easier to love them, to relate to them, to understand them. But the issue with that is that it has difficulty accepting other people who are different than they are. Then there is eros, which is the love of beauty. We were talking earlier, people were talking about getting their hair fixed right and we all are in touch with how we look, how we appear. And agape, eros, has that unfortunate, it loves what it thinks is lovely. So agape was a word that the Greeks didn't use much because it didn't describe many of them. But until Jesus of Nazareth came, it was a word that was not used too much. But the early believers were called, the word became prominent and prevalent. That early chapters of Acts, you hear about those people who came from a Jewish background and those people who came from other backgrounds coming together in the church, and how that it was discrimination and separation. It was only when they recognized that, no, we have the power to love beyond what we feel or think. In fact, so justice then is, Jesus defined it, I think, the best. He said we should love our neighbors as we love ourselves. So justice is what has been missing here in the United States in many places. A definition, I think one of the founders of the United States coined these words, and he said that justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. Let me just say that again. Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. I think that probably is a good description of what's happening now in the United States. Is that finally, after Selma, after you must understand you must ask the question, well, why? Why the protest? What's that about? Well, it's about 401 years of oppression, of the development of white privilege. I just use that word because what it means, what it describes, is folks who enslaved Africans came to the United States originally to help the British harvest tobacco. It was a boom crop. And the understanding was that they were to be indentured servants, and when they served their time, then they would be freed and given part of the land an opportunity to benefit. Well, what happened in reverse is that we were not given that. We were enslaved, and so we became the property of the slave owner. One notable illustration of this is the New York Life, a large insurance company, insured and I want to just make this distinction. We were not slaves. We were Africans who were enslaved. And what they did when they insured the enslaved ones is that when they died, the benefits went to the slave owners and not to the families of those who were enslaved. So that's just one example of many unjust. We were not treated equally. In fact, even to in our Constitution, some of those who wrote the Constitution themselves owned slaves. And so what we see in the United States is a dream. Martin Luther King said it much better than I can. He said that when we went in his speech, you might Google it, from Washington, he said that when we went to the Bank of Justice and wrote a check, it bounced because in the Bank of Justice, in the bank, there was no justice. And what we're seeing now is folks knocking again at that door, the Bank of Justice, requesting and demanding that we have justice, we have equality, and that has been earth-shaking. and it's been really, I think, brought to the forefront when that young man was brutally shot to death in the U.S. And we all saw it on TV. We all saw him being murdered, as it were, and it was primarily because he was a person of color. I think that we African Americans have seen that. We have, I have been stopped. I have been followed in stores because of the color of my skin. But I think the thing that really brought to the forefront is when others who had not had that was not their experience, they actually experienced the brutality of that, is when an awakening happened. And I might say it is still going on, that folks who were unaffected now, as Benjamin Franklin said, they are becoming aware of the injustice to fellow human beings. And actions are starting to happen, as opposed to just saying it's awful and we feel bad about it. But people are beginning to decide that, yes, we must do something about it. I want to just say that's been very helpful here, is to the dominant culture, to those whites who have enjoyed privilege. The question is asked, well, what should I do? Well, the first thing is to listen. And I think that's beginning to happen now in a way that it has never happened. The 80 years that I have been on the planet, I can't remember a time when I've seen so many non-blacks, not people of color, marching and demonstrating. So finally, we're seeing those who have not been affected but have benefited are now saying it's unjust and we ought to do something about it, which excites me. It's really a fruit of the civil rights movement. It's what Martin died for in reality. Is to see that becoming a reality is exciting and encouraging. That yes, we are becoming a nation of a land of the free in this regard. The other is to listen, to learn. I think one of the things that we have become really aware of, that our history is, someone who said this says, he that does not know history is liable to repeat it. And what we've seen here in the United States is our history has been negligent in giving all of the facts. We've heard people say, well, yes, we enslaved you, but some of the there were good slave owners and bad slave owners. Well, when you hear that, that's a paradox. How can someone who owns you and you have all the allegiance and responsibility to do what they say do, can that be treating you nicely? Was that the Creator's intention, that we become each other's slaves? So the other thing is really to learn. I think that's another very important dimension, step, is to begin to learn, to become a student of history, and particularly as it relates to this matter of justice. And then I think really what's very important is to lament. We sang the spiritual. I have to sing it almost even to communicate it. It says, way down yonder by myself, I couldn't hear nobody pray. This was a song written by Africans who were enslaved, and they realized that all they had was each other. And what we are seeing now is some more folks is praying with us, or taking action. That's exciting and encouraging. So the lament with us to moan with us, to mourn with us the tragedy of segregation and racism that has kept us from realizing our potential in the fullness. And then I think the third thing after listening, learning, and lamenting is to lift. And that's one of the motivators that motivate things that motivated me in my area of reconciliation, my passion for reconciliation, is that no, I just can't just be on the planet. I need to do something to lift others. And I think that is all of our mission, is to help and to lift others. I'm going to stop and go to Boyan, because there are many, obviously, 80 years out there, it's a lot. I think the danger is giving you too much, but this is just the tip of the iceberg of this condition that has brought about this need for reconciliation. So I'd like to just maybe stop my talk and hear from you. Questions directed at any particular area that you want to talk about around reconciliation, and some of the things that I have learned through my years and time being a victim, and hopefully being a answer, response to the lack of justice.
Alan, thank you. And maybe this might be a good time to open mics and just have that kind of dialogue. I know Alan likes that type of thing. I think most of us do. So instead of feeling like you have to type the question into the chat room, just feel free to have an open conversation, dialogue. So Alan, I do have a question, because we sit here and are able to bask in your wisdom of all your years and experiences. But you know, how did you get into reconciliation? What was it, and at what age? Were you young? Did this just happen through years and decades, or was there a catalyst there that threw you into the need of reconciling?
I think that, as I recall, there were three events actually. One was when I realized that the ugly things that I had done to others who didn't look like me were on the margins, was what was happening to me. And when I recognized that, then maybe an act of restitution at first was that I need to do for those who were suffering some of the same things I suffered. The other was a conference in California, a world conference. It was high school students. I was 16, and Ralph Bunche, the former Secretary of State, and the man who was the first one to negotiate a treaty between Israel and Egypt. He spent time with me where he would speak, and then there was a big fireplace, a seal, a beautiful place. If you ever come to the U.S., you must go to Carmel. The sand is white, there's cypress trees, and this big fireplace that we sat in front of. After he spoke, he'd come and sit and talk with us really for hours. We'd just be, cutting it up. And it so impacted me and impressed me that I took, there was something I could do. And I began totally following that, pursuing that. And the second event, I think, that really got me turned in the direction of reconciliation was I was, my senior year in high school, I was sent to a conference on racial prejudice. And I don't know if this is probably beyond some of you age, but Joan Baez was one of we're about the same age, the singer. And she and her sister were there, and it was my really first opportunity to be in a setting where there was many whites as blacks and Chinese and and Japanese, and it was a powerful world experience that really caused me to see that we really were all Homo sapiens. And then I think the thing that really was the clincher was Jesus. That I think that has been he has been the energizer of my passion and my work and effort in the area of reconciliation.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Alan.
Yes.
Hi, this is Joanna from London.
Yes, how are you, Anna?
Do you recognize me at all?
Yes, yes, I do. God save the Queen and all of her subjects.
Oh, thanks. Gosh, so many amazing memories with you. Amazing, amazing. Wonderful, wonderful. I was remembering you being in our house a long time ago when you came to the gathering in London.
Oh, yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I also remember the way you learned my name. Do you remember?
No, I don't. Tell me, refresh my memory.
Ioana. Ioana, hold.
Ioana. Yes, I do remember.
You want to hold
yes.
my hand? Do you remember this one?
Yes, yes.
That, you always put everything to music. But anyways, I do have a question for you, and it's good to see you.
Good to see you.
It's in relationship to the church. A friend of mine, an American friend of mine, said this: maybe it's the church's fault. We mix at school because we have to. We mix at work because we have to. We mix at public events because we have to. Church is the one place we segregate without getting in trouble. I'm not saying church should pursue a certain percentage of mixed races, but we're losing out if we don't. Imagine what we could learn not only about each other, but about God himself. Imagine hours of worship, prayer, testimonies, and meals together from ethnic groups united in Christ. Now, I am part of a mixed church in London. And of course, the way people have been affected in America, it's come to us as well, evidently. And this issue has sparked discussions. And how do you approach, I'm a white woman from Eastern Europe.
Oh, really?
And what, as you were saying, what drove you was Jesus. What drove Davis and I to get together, besides love, was the person of Jesus. And, you know, we know that in the kingdom of Jesus, there's no Jew, no Gentile.
Correct.
And his church can be like this. But I believe what my friend was saying, David Stevens, is true. In the church, we have seen it, you know, that the white person takes more priority than the black person who's been there for a long time. And so for me, I want to know in what way, I've been struggling with this, I can approach the church in trying to bridge things up between the two groups of people. And I know the church seems to be willing, but we've heard many times, you know, the same thing. It's like, it's like my child coming and apologizing for something they've done, but they know they will do it again. So we want genuine change. Could you advise us in anything?
Well, first of all, you wanna, I think we use the word, like I don't refer to myself so much as a Christian anymore, because what's happened is it's like a nickel. It's been handled so much you can't see the image of Jesus in it. So when the virus started, they said, well, we're going to close all the churches. You can't close the church of God. You could close the building, you can close the house of prayer, but the church is bigger than a building. It's an experience. So we as believers are empowered. In fact, Jesus said, I give you a new commandment. Here's a brand new commandment. To love one another, and by this will everybody know that you are my disciple. So we should again sing a song says, and they'll use the word made, says, give me that old time religion, give me that old time religion, give me the old time religion. It's good enough for me. It make you love everybody. Make is really probably not the word. It empowers you. See, the love of God empowers me to love my enemy.
That's right.
That's one thing that I think is so important for us to understand, that we're called radical. We're called to love our enemies. I just tell you one story. A fella, probably 2 years ago, in front of my house, he's a white man, and the neighborhood I live in is there are whites and African, black, and other nationalities of people, and so he cussed me out and he talked about me so bad. In fact, the saying here in America is, he called me everything but a child of God. He used every curse word he could think of, and I was upset by it, and I almost took physical action against him. And I have to say this, the Holy Spirit said to me, love the hell out of him. And I think that is what God empowers us as believers to love the hell out. And I think that is what sustained us as a people here in this country, is to understand that our call and our empowerment is to love our enemies. When Martin Luther King first introduced nonviolence and had people marching, there were people who didn't understand them. He and Malcolm X had a great debate around that. Violence was the way. And Martin, out of his understanding and grasp of what that commandment that Jesus gave, it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command to love one another. So I think that's critical as individuals, that we really love and we listen to how we may be impacting in a negative way those people who are oppressed. So that's why I think what's happening, but as white privilege, is people are beginning to understand some things that they do, although not they intend to do, but out of their ignorance or their blind spots affect people of color, people who are oppressed in a devastating way. And I think so that other piece is to love. And the other thing I think is important is that it is as a white woman, a British white woman, it is your responsibility and opportunity to speak to those who look like you. When I'm called on to speak to people of privilege, I remind them, look, I'm not an expert on racism or white privilege. You are. So you need to speak to your people and have that conversation. And I can certainly acquaint you with the fact of things that I've experienced, white privilege on the other side. I think that's where my mission is to help folks understand really what it's like to be oppressed and to not have the opportunities that they have.
Thank you. Boyan, do you want to go ahead and read Bo's question?
Yes. Actually, there is a question from, oops, sorry.
Boyan, can I just say one thing before you start?
Yes, go ahead, please.
I remember the first time I laid eyes on you, or knew you really, when we were standing on the Danube. And
Yes.
you loved me. And thank you, man. you acquainted me with things, and I just want to just say, I want to go on record to let you know I'm deep. That was what? That was 20 years ago. And thank you, Boyan.
I remember that as well. This was in Croatia. We were looking through the Danube. On the other side was Serbia. This was in Vukovar, when we had, as a part of our own program, we had a trip to Vukovar to experience the war.
Yes.
And yes, the Serbia, we could just see it. It was how do you say it? Throw rock away from where we stayed. Yes, that's when we started talking, and thank you for noticing me. Now it's much easier to notice me. People cannot escape me. But back then I was just shy and silent, and thank you very much.
Yeah.
There is a question from Bo. Can I read that question to you, Alan?
Oh, certainly.
So Bo says, it seems like many of the protests turned very violent and destructive, resulting in loss of life and property. Do you think the leaders of BLM and Antifa are representing justice, or is there perhaps a better way?
Yeah, what I think is interesting, because here in Seattle, you probably have seen in the paper the taking over of a certain 6 blocks here in Seattle. I think it's important to understand that in this protest, there are folks who will take advantage take the opportunity to voice their concerns, which are very different from the protests of folks who want to see justice happen, as opposed to people feel that have other agenda items. So I think it's really important, and it's a distraction. In fact, in some of the cases, they don't show that maybe as much, is those who are protesting because of injustice will oftentimes corral those and say, no, you're not a part of this. This is not, that's not where we are. And I think one illustration of this is when Martin Luther King was preparing, all the people that were involved in the SCLC, which was the organization that Martin Luther King organized. One night he was training them in nonviolence. Now, the nonviolence meant that if somebody slapped you, you didn't slap them back. Well, that was unheard of. And so he was training them about this, and a white man walked in. He was in the part of the group. There were whites and blacks being trained. And he stepped out of the crowd and knocked Martin on his behind. And the folks saw him do that. Listen, you haven't seen guys wanted to take him apart, and Martin stopped them. He said, no, that's not our the way we're going to do here. Under no circumstances are you to give back evil for evil. And the result, he gave his life for that. He gave his life. He went on to California and not stayed in Memphis because garbage men were being ill-treated and underpaid. He stayed that night, and that next morning he was shot and accused, killed, because his understanding was, his commitment was nonviolence, that no, we won't return evil for evil. And that was the thing that really drove a real conflict between him and Malcolm X, who felt like if white folks did stuff to you, just eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And Martin said, if we go with that route, then all of us will be blind and toothless. I think that is the thing that is deep a part of this whole nonviolence.
Thank you very much. I hope, Bo, you are satisfied with the answer. Actually, just to mention it very shortly, Samuel and I had the privilege to go in 2011 actually to Atlanta in Georgia, and they have just reopened the church, which they turned into a museum of Martin Luther King Jr. and just marvelous things that you can see, and remarkable things, how he worked, how he, what he contributed, and actually there is even a grave. He is buried over there in that same place. Okay, we have another comment from our friends from Cornerstone in Uganda, and it says, we have to go through a subconscious cleansing that can only take place with Jesus. Prejudice or racial discrimination doesn't begin in the mind, it begins in our subconscious. Belton, thank you very much for authenticity in sharing your story. Greetings from Uganda.
Ah, thank you so very much.
The next one is from Polylogos Association in Romania. And it says, along with being met by Jesus, what would you say it was the best thing that happened to you? That thing that makes you look back and still smile.
Oh, man. Well, I think probably the thing that is most prominent, you've heard this, my story. I met a woman. There's a song we sing, says, we're over town. And she happened to be white. And when I went to her father to ask for her hand in marriage, he said, no way. And he disowned her for 10 years. He had nothing to do. We had his first two grandchildren, our two oldest. You met two of the youngest one, Heather, last week, but Noel and Elizabeth are the oldest two. And for 10 years, he did not acknowledge. He instructed her, my wife's sister and brother, that Margaret was dead. And after about 10 years, we had an experience. I won't get into all the particulars of that. This is, I think, my first understanding of forgiveness. Is the Spirit spoke to me and said, you need to ask your father to forgive you for the bitterness you held against him. And I said in the conversation, I said, what's the matter with you? Me forgive him. I didn't do nothing to him. He said, yeah, but you got bitterness in your heart, and that bitterness is going to kill you. Bitterness is like you eating poison and expecting the person you hate to die. So I, reluctantly at first, but then realizing that's the way, I called him and he asked his forgiveness and he was not receptive. But from that point on, God began to heal that relationship. And a thing that was when Elizabeth got married, I officiated the service. And so I couldn't walk my wife down the aisle because, of course, I was up in front as the minister, you know, like I didn't get to your wedding, but, and so I was up in the front, and guess who walked Margaret down the aisle, Boyard? Right, her dad. So I have seen the manifestation of bitterness and forgiveness. That probably was the most exciting thing that there are many other things, but that probably is at the top, is when, and I officiated at his funeral, at his wife's funeral, by his request, his mother's funeral, by his request, his brother's funeral, by request. And when he was in the last years of his life, he needed someone with him. And so Margaret and I had committed that we were gonna, if whoever parents needed help, we were gonna step in. So for the next, that year, we Margaret went monthly to Walnut Creek. We were in Seattle, and there in Walnut Creek, which is 1,000 miles. And she spent time till he passed. So I've seen reconciliation from the beginning to the end stage. And I could go on and on, but I think that's probably the thing that I get excited about. It's the top. And by the way, Margaret still wants to be married to me after 54 years. You could.
All right, we have another comment. It says, bitterness and forgiveness. We'll write a song about this. My brother Alan, I thought your story cannot make me cry again. This is from Camellia and Liviu to everyone. So we sure should expect another song from Liviu about this now. Hannah says, you mentioned briefly the need to lament and grieve the injustice that have happened. What part of the current racial issues are most grieving to you?
Well, the loss of life. Floyd's death, I think, really it really, I think, brought to the forefront what's been happening for many years to people of color in the United States. And also, I think the thing that grieves me is to see law enforcement officers who are here to serve and to protect us are perpetrators of violence and destruction. And I think that's another piece that's happening now, is that we're recognizing, but what's happened with the police force is it's become militarized. So they're here to keep us in check, but that's not their primary role. And also the training. So the result is, for example, the young man who was shot to death there in Georgia at that fast food restaurant. He was drunk. He was inebriated. He was in his car, asleep, and was very cooperative when he was awakened, even told by the policeman to drive his car to another place. And then after 45 minutes, just to show you, that's what the thing is around Black Lives Matter. It doesn't mean Black Lives Matter only. In fact, you correctly stated, is Black lives also. That's the biggie, is to understand that my life is as valuable as your life, vice versa. Well, what occurred there was these men were not trained how to intervene a non-violent situation. And the result is they not having that training, and also the thing that really, I think, really impacted them was this one man was able to get away from them, and as their adrenaline kicked, the testosterone kicked in, and they shot him. Not realize this is a human being that they were called to and paid a good salary to protect and to serve. I think that is and I think finally, people are getting, there's a segment that want to talk about law and order, but some of the laws that were on the books were unjust. So you've got to have justice, or you don't have a fair and equal and open society. Because the people that are in power, that's another thing that's very important about this, the white privilege, is that racism, someone said that African American people of color, we have to deal with prejudice. White privilege is the ability not only to not like something or disdain something, but to do something about it, having the power to act. And I think that is another big piece, and why we don't want people coming into the protest with violence, because we know that that's a loser. We know that. We've seen that. And so and finally, I will say this, it's probably one of the reasons some say that Malcolm was assassinated, because he began to embrace nonviolence and the claims of Christ. So I think anyway, I've answered your question, but anyway.
All right. Another comment from Samuel Petrovsky. He's saying that you should write a book. So there is one idea for you. Another comment also from Cornerstone, Uganda. It says, Mr. Belton, any chance you would share your story to our Ugandan friends? I have been really blessed, it should say, listening to you. So maybe we can put in touch Cornerstone Uganda with Marta, and then Marta can overtake communication and see with you what's up. Next question from Eva from Ireland. She says, hi, Alan. So good to listen to your experience. Thank you for sharing your story with your marriage. So very powerful and moving. I have a question about grief, too. If I were Black and living in America, I often think I'd probably find it hard to keep going due to the grief. How can we who don't have experience of racism, but as humans have an experience of grief, how can we help you grieve and help you heal?
Well, just her mentioning it to show you is to lament, to acknowledge that it exists is helpful. I remember I sang that little song, I couldn't hear nobody pray. The point is that sometimes what's difficult was that you were alone. I mean, no one spoke in your behalf. And so just to even have someone who looks different than you identify with your struggle is very important, encouraging, but also it shows that somebody's hearing, somebody's really listening and recognizing there's an injustice to another human being. I think that is I think vital. That it gives credit to my humanity from another human being. The other thing I would say is to become a student of the injustice. And I want to say again, the forum over these 20 years of existence have been working, and I think I have to say this, I applaud the work of Ram and economic, because I think that's what it's about. It's exciting to see your generation. I kind of feel like, okay, well, maybe I can go ahead on. Boyan's got it, Rachel's got it. Oh yeah, I can pass it on. And I think that's another big important piece is to willing to step up and to be accountable.
All right. Thank you very much. And I think one last question actually from Rachel. So Rachel, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alan. What really stood out to me was when you were talking about slavery, you used the word we, how you identify with your ancestors who were enslaved.
Yes.
It's really hard for a lot of us white people to say we enslaved Africans, to also use that we to identify. And how important is that in the reconciliation process, and how can we get to that point?
Well, I think you hit it there right on the head. It's when you're privileged, you don't recognize it as privilege. You didn't decide to be white. I mean, your mom and dad, they're the ones. But with that comes certain privileges, so I think I think guilty is not good, because then you're trying to, I heard people say statements like, oh, listen, I don't see no color. I said, you must be blind. As black as I am, let me give you my glasses. What they're trying to do is kind of put some salve over that feeling of feeling guilty because they were privileged. But the question I say to the privilege is, we have to say in the vernacular, what you gonna do with your privilege? What you gonna do with your privilege? And then we see others rise to the occasion, their privilege, and begin to, those people marching, yeah, we got this pandemic, this virus over here. When you think about people forgot about that, up close and breathe on one another, talking loud, because of they're being driven. They see a evil that can threaten the existence of society, and we got to do something. We can't sit still any longer and intellectualize this thing. We must do something about it. And I think that is what is vital. And I want to thank you and your husband for stepping up. You could do Rachel and these young people have skills that could be doing other things, but they have committed their life to being a vessel that God can use to bring about reconciliation. And that's what it takes. It takes individual. Yeah, we can talk about societal change, but it's where the individual, where it's got to start. Thank you. And don't stop.
Thank you very much. We certainly will not stop, even though this is our last Zoom for this, if I may call it a season. Thank you very much for being part either of this one, those of you who are live here with us, or watching it via Facebook, or watching recording. For those of you who joined us in the last couple of months, several Zoom events, we certainly will not stop. We will continue on. There will be some things happening during the summer, especially here in the region, in the Balkans. So please stay tuned to our website and our Facebook page, so you can know what's happening, maybe even in the country where you live. We hope and we pray that the borders will open more freely, so that we can see each other person to person, which is much more enjoyable, obviously, than just this. But as Alan said at the beginning, thanks God for this technology, so we can be united, we can talk together even from the other side of the American continent or African continent, and all of us here in Europe. I will be